Hello and welcome to this Serial Geek TV episode commentary for Beast Island, an episode of She-Ra, Princess of Power, produced by Filmation Studios. So here we are with the second episode of She-Ra. Even to this day people seem to be confused by the order of things, thus I'll repeat what I stated in my episode commentary for Into Etheria and start off by summarising the production. The first 5 episodes of She-Ra were produced as Into Etheria, Beast Island, She-Ra Unchained, Reunions and Battle for Bright Moon, collectively known as The Sword of She-Ra, parts 1 to 5. After production was completed, Filmation decided to edit together the first 5 episodes of She-Ra, trimming the content for time, and releasing it as a movie in theatres titled The Secret of the Sword, to better showcase the introduction of She-Ra and capitalise on the huge success of Masters of the Universe. And before I forget, I should talk about the introduction sequence that was used on the first 3 episodes. It's wonderful. An introduction sequence that showcases She-Ra but does not explain her connection to Adora, the Force captain of the evil Horde, or her connection to He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe. As the first 5 episodes of She-Ra were never shown on terrestrial TV in the UK, I didn't actually see this introduction until 1997, when Owen Sharp, a fellow fan of He-Man and She-Ra, sent over a VHS tape with his recording of it. Keen-eyed viewers will note that the recap here, as with all recaps, contains some interesting differences. Quite possibly the most notable is that when He-Man confronts Adora, he is holding the Sword of Power and Adora is wielding the Sword of Protection. That is not what we saw last time, but methinks the visuals were altered to make the summary far easier to digest, rather than new viewers watching thinking, but how did Adora obtain the Sword of Protection? I don't know. So here we go with Beast Island, penned by the late, great Larry DiTillio. And here we are in the Whispering Woods. It's not hard to understand why so many fans consider, or at least muse over the idea that Madame Razz is a Twigget, or at the very least related to them in some way. Purple skin, white hair, a diminutive size, and yet she was never referred to as a Twigget. Linda Gary in the He-Man series gave us a wonderful plethora of voices. Teela, Evil Lynn, the Sorceress, Queen Marlena, Driel, Katrina, etc. And in the She-Ra series, the always talented voice actress was able to give us many, many more, including Madame Razz with her fantastic Brooklyn accent, Shadow Weaver, Scorpia, the youthful Glimmer. What a voice talent Linda Gary was, so very sorely missed. And now we're going to see a scene that was removed from the movie version when Madame Razz has issues creating a flying ship. In fairness to Madame Razz, it is quite a tall order to create an entire ship. Not sure Orko ever attempted to create something as big as a ship. I love the way Linda Gary delivers the spell with the mid-sentence.
Measle Mip, let us have a flying ship. Uh-oh. That doesn't look right to me.
You said frying instead of flying.
I always have to remind myself of how unique it is to see Battle Cat without He-Man. In the He-Man series, that was actually a very rare occurrence. Here we have the pair separated, and we're not even sure for how long, as the most powerful man in the universe is a prisoner on Beast Island. Also, nice to see Glimmer demonstrating her teleportation powers, one of many powers the rest of the series didn't use to great effect, or at all. Although in fairness to the writers, Glimmer was somewhat of a confusing character to write for, as she could be presented as a leader and one of the most powerful rebels on the planet with her abilities, or as an immature young woman. And here we are, Beast Island. I always thought that Beast Island's exterior was a rather underwhelming visual. Also, as the series progresses, it becomes a rather confusing location. We see, even in this episode, a great deal of land around it, which is not evident from that establishing shot. Not only that, the episode Jungle Fever has an entire village located on Beast Island, or at the very least, nearby. It's rare for Filmation to bungle a location, but I feel that Beast Island could have been so much more, especially given that the rebels seem to fear it. The same point could also be directed towards the Valley of the Lost, another location that starts off as terrifying, then, as the series progresses, just seems to be a mild nuisance.
Evil rebel, I serve the rightful rulers of Etheria.
A memorable scene between Adora and He-Man here, as the clearly sheltered Adora has no knowledge of the Horde's cruelty. Here, He-Man challenges Force Captain Adora to see the real Etheria.
And with good reason.
Liar! The Horde are just rulers, kind, generous, and caring.
You can't believe that. Haven't you seen how the Horde treats people?
This scene is quite possibly the arc of the entire series, a moment when the force of good challenges another to look beyond the lies and deceit to witness the horrible reality. This is what the rebels have been doing all along, helping the Etherian people to realise the evil of this monster they call the Horde, and the need for a unified and active opposition. He-Man dares the evil-looking Adora, and by evil I mean she has a slight scowl on her face during this episode, to discover the truth about the Horde, an organisation that Adora has called her family since birth. In this scene, Adora truly believes that she serves the rightful rulers of Etheria, which is a fantastic line, clearly a sign that she has been brainwashed. The rebels now on their way to Beast Island via Madame Razzi's flying ship, and again, if you were watching the movie version, you really had no idea where this magical flying ship had come from, though it wasn't too problematic unlike some of the later edits made to the movie. This particular episode brings the rebels to the front a bit more, with less focus on the star players of the Horde. Madame Raz, for example, receives a great deal of exposure in this episode. That ship that Hordak pilots, even though it's never named in the series, only in the production material, has a rather awesome sounding name, the Annihilator. Actually, one of the first Easter eggs I ever spotted in the series was the die on Hordak's control panel. Still makes me smile to this day. I actually remember actively posting this as a gift of sorts for the members of the late 90s He-Man and She-Ra mailing list. Good times. This scene actually wonderfully showcases how outmatched the rebels are at every turn. They have an archaic flying ship, whilst the Horde have the aforementioned Annihilator, a ship with tremendous firepower. I'll talk about Beast Island shortly, but I should mention Glimmer's powers. Here we see that Glimmer saves everyone from the crashing ship by teleporting them out at the same time. An impressive feat, right? Whilst her character was pretty defined throughout the series, her powers were most definitely not. Into Etheria, Beast Island and Small Problems are the only episodes of the series to show Glimmer use her teleportation power. This would make her such a powerful character throughout the series, but a lack of continuity or a consciously forced decision meant that she did not use these powers to get her out of dangerous situations when it was obvious that she could have. Season 2 played around with Glimmer's powers in some surprising ways, with the episodes Return of the General and Portrait of Doom showing that she could fly. That sounds like a joke when you see how grounded she is throughout most of the series, but yes, Glimmer could fly. It was never explained how Glimmer, whose ability to control light, could fly. As with her rarely used teleportation powers, her ability to fly would have gotten her out of many a dangerous situation. Finally, another Season 2 episode, The Perils of Peekaboo, Glimmer demonstrates the ability to turn herself invisible. I'm kind of laughing because it's so ludicrous how much this character could do. Not only that, but she can also turn others invisible in the episode. Again, if you know the She-Ra series, think how many times that could have gotten her out of some pretty dangerous situations. I would not have minded as much had the writers explained in a throwaway line that this was a new power or a developing power, but no, these powers just seem to happen. Oh, Glimmer. And now the rebels explore, for want of a better word, Beast Island. The artists do a fantastic job of bringing this new location to life, not with obvious threatening structures, but with an unfamiliar and odd look to much of the surroundings. This episode depicts its namesake as a very threatening evil place, a jail where few escape.
Oh, dearie my.
That goes double for me. I agree, totally.
And Act 1 of Beast Island comes to an end. Sadly, as I said before, this enigma of the Horde will be reused over and over throughout the series, each time reducing the threat in its presence. Actually, in the episode Prisoners of Beast Island, the monsters are convinced to help the rebels fight back against the Horde, completely negating the threat of this once terrifying location. This monster that attacks our dear rebel friends was designed by the awesome Charles Zembillas. He designed many characters on the He-Man and She-Ra series and was instrumental in many of the Horde villain designs. And speaking of character designs, I should talk about the awesome relationship between Filmation and Mattel. For those that don't know, Filmation and Mattel worked together to create the heroes and villains of the She-Ra series. Many believe that just because the Horde were a part of the Masters of the Universe toy line, that they were intended as Masters of the Universe villains. The truth is that Mattel knew that even though the Horde would appear in the She-Ra cartoon, that was always the plan, the Horde characters would appeal to the male audience and that the female characters would appeal to the female audience. Thus the toy line was simply split. Many artists worked on designing the characters, two prominent names being Ted Mayer at Mattel and Charles Zembillis at Filmation. Both of them worked wonders to create these characters. Some may be listening to this wondering why there are certain differences between the toy designs and the cartoon designs. The simple truth is that even though both companies were working on the characters, at some point, for example, the Glimmer doll would have to appeal to the consumer as a doll, and the animation model would have to be altered in order for the character to work in animation. I do hope that makes some sense. I think we can all agree that during the 1980s, Filmation and Mattel really made some magic happen. Lightning in a bottle, perhaps? Here we see Adora begin her mission to prove He-Man wrong, but, of course, there is a part of her that is probably suspecting some truth in what the most powerful man in the universe says.
Hello, boys.
Look at this. This is Glimmer's teleportation power used perfectly. It's arguably one of the best Glimmer scenes in the series, plus she caps it off by blowing the smoke from the tip of the blaster. Awesome. And here we are kind of introduced to Grislaw, who, much like his counterparts, was a far more serious character in his initial appearances. Grislaw is actually the lead commander on Beast Island, a role that would eventually just vanish from the character as he became yet another bumbling villain, barely able to tie his own shoelaces. I mean, he doesn't actually have shoelaces, but you get my point. And we get the first of 3 wonderful scenes showing the Horde rule over Etheria. Scenes like this really didn't pop up too much as the series went on, and it's such a shame because it shows just how powerful and cruel the Horde could be.
Enjoying your water, old man?
And remember, in the script, these Horde troopers were human, hence their cruel and patronising nature towards the slaves. I think it would have been really fascinating had we seen the Horde troopers as human, as it really would have emphasised the lack of humanity faced by the people of Etheria. Thinking about it, out of the 5 parts that make up the Sword of She-Ra, this part is probably the least memorable. Beast Island is a rather self-contained action and rescue story following the action-packed precedent set by the premiere Into Etheria. This episode is also the only one not featuring She-Ra because it is devoted to exposing the world of Etheria before her arrival. At this, the episode is entirely successful. We really do see how Etheria functions. It's a very different world when compared to Eternia. Whereas Into Etheria introduces the Horde warriors and the third part, She-Ra Unchained, focuses on Horde technology, Beast Island is concerned only with Horde dominance, which Adora will slowly discover with her exploration. Pure and simple, this is a world controlled by Hordak. The Horde scares its citizens with an Alcatraz-like prison. They limit freedom of speech, destroy for no reason, and enslave the people. It's a pretty hard life living on Etheria. And here is a scene that I do wish they hadn't removed from the movie version because it's rather powerful in its nature. It's probably one of the most heartbreaking scenes of Horde dominance to watch because a child pleads with his father to not let the Horde trooper take the family horse, with the trooper pushing the boy to the ground.
That's my horse!
Little fool!
There is no joy in this scene or even happy resolution to it. Maybe it was edited because it was quite an intense scene and really does push the story into a very dark place. It's a very real scene, think about it. Close your eyes, forget about the striking visuals and simply listen to the dialogue. It's very tragic. And here's another scene removed. This one I can understand, for time. Madame Raz again uses the wrong word and turns the Horde troopers into sheep. Now where are the He-Man and She-Ra customizers making these sheep troopers? I know you're out there. But yes, this episode, as I mentioned before, really does showcase Madame Raz and highlights her magical abilities, even if they do fail from time to time. As we continue to see scenes of Horde dominance, it's pretty amazing how much work Larry DiTillio put into the series Bible with regards to the social setup of Etheria. He describes that Etheria is, at its heart, a pastoral world, its major occupations being farming and hoarding. There are mines as well, all of them controlled by the Horde, who are systematically plundering the wealth of Etheria. Fishing is another major occupation, confined, of course, to the seaside kingdoms. There are many islands off the main continent of Etheria that constitute small kingdoms in themselves, or sometimes several islands in a chain will be considered one kingdom. Other occupations include travelling merchants, bards, foresters, jewellers, and of course, magicians. That is just one paragraph from an epic read from the mind of the late great Larry DiTillio. Can you imagine being a freelance writer in the 1980s and receiving this series Bible? Your mind would have been racing with ideas for stories based on the fantastical world that had been created. And now the rebels finally have located He-Man. I love the way Battlecat races over to his allies. You have to remember, under all that bravado and power, it's still Cringer, and Cringer loves Adam, He-Man. Interesting here that Hordak's cannon arm freezes Battlecat. I would have preferred to see the fighting tiger stunned and subsequently falling to the ground in a heap. We've seen Battlecat stunned in battle before, so this was not an issue about cartoon violence.
As for you, He-Man, we will give you some time to consider what price your friends will pay for your silence.
Hordak is really rather evil in this scene with the rebels. George DiCenzo gives his villain the sound of a dictator free from worry. Whereas Skeletor was sometimes buffoonish and humorous, especially as the He-Man cartoon progressed, Hordak was given an ominous, foreboding edge in She-Ra's early episodes. To many, Hordak would be the antidote to Skeletor, but this would not last long. In such future episodes as A Talent for Trouble and Flowers for Hordak, Etheria's villain would become much more comedic and versatile, losing the darkness that gave him such definition to begin with. Shadow Weaver is depicted in a similarly evil way, although she never lost her magical mysteriousness. Their evil, especially in this particular episode, is only the tip of the iceberg, and for a moment in time it was rather exciting.
Time to go, folks.
He-Man!
Another aspect I like about this story is that going in, the rebels know that they are out of their depth, and you can sense they're almost acceptant of the fact they failed in their mission to rescue He-Man. There's a wonderful humility to the rebels. Although I think we all know that in reality, Battlecat probably could bust them out. After all, we saw him smash through a concrete door earlier in the episode. The good thing about He-Man saving the rebels here is that it doesn't really undermine them. They came all this way against the odds, and one of their number did indeed rescue He-Man. If anything, we admired the bravery of the rebels, even if the end result was not a very successful rescue mission. Before I forget, another deleted scene that didn't make it past the script stage had Grislaw and Adora wondering who He-Man is as they observed his cell on the view screen. It was a throwaway scene, but I think it would have been nice to see Grislaw and Adora interacting, regardless of how brief it was. Another thing I've always liked about these first 5 episodes is when the rebels witness firsthand the acts of He-Man's great strength. Granted, it's often Glimmer in awe of what she has just seen, but I think it's safe to say we'd all be a little in awe of seeing He-Man in person almost effortlessly defeating the forces of evil. So the Destructo tanks we see here, they only appear in the earlier episodes. At some point the decision was made to redesign them with Hordak's face, as many of the Horde ships and vehicles sport his glorious visage. It was a sensible redesign. There's also a wonderful contrast in these scenes at Beast Island. Here we have the rebels who are all clothed a certain way, whereas He-Man is still that well-mannered, half-naked barbarian from Eternia in furry underpants and boots. Thinking about it, what did the rebels actually do with this Batmech that they have clearly stolen and subsequently used to get back to the Whispering Woods? Given the rebels' lack of firepower, especially in the final battle for Bright Moon, you think this Horde ship would have come in very handy. Granted, it would have confused many in the battle, including we the audience, but the rebels could have customised it maybe? Maybe they could have thrown a couple of pastel colours on it or a rebel motif in order to identify it. I guess at this point I'm just thinking out loud, aren't I? Well, there's another custom ship for someone to make.
Well, that's one prison the Horde will have to do without.
I've never seen anything like that. Oh, you're incredible.
And a classic moment. Glimmer is impressed with the most powerful man in the universe. He-Man utterly destroying a section of Beast Island is fantastic. Part of me thinks this goes against a moral segment somewhere in the He-Man series about never damaging property. But hey, it's the Horde and it's a prison. I think we can agree that the most powerful man in the universe is doing the right thing here. Other people's property be damned. Back in the Fright Zone, I should mention one thing. The Fright Zone was originally conceived as having 2 thrones, and some production art I own and have showcased over the years reveals this. I would hazard to guess that Shadow Weaver would be the one to sit next to Hordak in an accompanying throne, though I think they made the right choice in these initial episodes of having Weaver float eerily next to Hordak, acting as a council of sorts. and now we see Adora confront her parents. The bond between Adora and Shadow Weaver isn't just magical, it's emotional as well, at least for Adora. Weaver tells Hordak, remember who she really is, and we know that the woman who serves as their Force captain is not herself. She is trapped, as all Etherian people are, in a web of lies, treachery and falsehoods. This is the true power of the evil Horde, and that is why He-Man is such a threat to the evil Horde. He is not from Etheria. He has not been made to believe the lies. Seeing Shadow Weaver's dark magic in this opening saga, I'm reminded that whilst they did use her magic a lot in the series, it was never really or truly as dark or mysterious or as evil as we see here. Yes, Shadow Weaver continued to brainwash people, but there felt like a great deal more manipulation here. It may be because of how the evil Horde are presented in these first 5 episodes. The closest we would come to another horrific brainwash once again in the series is when Shadow Weaver controls the mind of Peekaboo in the Season 2 episode The Perils of Peekaboo. And this chapter ends with a truly iconic sight, Shadow Weaver with the Sword of Protection in her hands. What a visual! Given the mysterious nature of her character, we know that her wielding this weapon of great power is not a good thing, and, as we shall see, Shadow Weaver will do her utmost to figure out the secret of the sword. I mentioned that this second part, Beast Island, is easily the most forgettable part of the secret of the sword. It also seems to be the least important, but it stands out as an important blueprint for the Rebels going forward, and with that in mind, and the scenes of Horde cruelty, it may be the very foundation of the entire Princess of Power series. This episode essentially helps us to get to know the main characters a little better. While Hordak and Shadow Weaver are as effective as lying parents as they are vicious warlords, the Rebels prove that there's a power within the rebellion beyond the Princess of Power we'd soon meet. And, as I've already mentioned, the titular island would lose its fear factor in future episodes, but here it's as dangerous as it is barren, with its isolation from the rest of Etheria nicely mirroring Adora's increasing separation from the Horde. Her scenes with He-Man awaken her stark curiosity of the outside world, while the scenes where she learns the heartbreaking truth spell the eventual end to her loyalty. The chilling closing scene seems to reset the balance, but not for long. And that's the end of this commentary. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.